Sony's actual first product was not a tape recorder, a radio, or even a Walkman. In fact, their very first product was an electric rice cooker.
Wait, what? How?
That's exactly what I'm going to talk about in this episode. My name is Luthfi, and you just tuning in to Saturday Stories. When most people think of Sony, the first thing that comes to mind is the Walkman, which is the iconic device that you use to listen to your favorite tracks. Well, if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, or maybe you remember watching movies at home with Betamax as your media of choice, well, even though the VHS is the most used in this case. Or of course, you spending countless of hours playing the games on a console called the PlayStation. Now, if you've been following this channel, let you know that I already made 3 videos where I'm diving deep into the world of PlayStation. We've been talking about the games, the hardware, and the legacy. But as I was looking back, I realized something. I told you all these stories about the PlayStation, but I haven't told you the story of the parents. I haven't told you the history of the legendary company that brought the PlayStation to life in the first place. Well, which is Sony in this case. But all that global success like the PlayStation, the Walkman, or the high-tech sensors or something like that didn't start in a futuristic lab. It started in 1946 in a damaged building in Tokyo right after the war. 2 men, a few tools, and a very big dream. This is where the story of the giant begins. It all began in 1946, where Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita founded a company called Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo Kabushiki Gaisha. Well, this literally means Tokyo Telecommunications Engineering Corporation. Well, even though it was a company, they spending their days fixing the broken radios in a city that they trying to rebuild in an electric repair shop. And back then, they weren't Sony that we know today. And as I mentioned before, their first attempt at innovation, it was meant to be a mill. Their electric rice cooker was essentially just a wooden bucket with some electrodes at the bottom. The result? Well, it was a disaster. The rice was either burnt to a crisp or completely raw. It was a commercial failure and never even made it to the market. To survive, they went back to basics, repairing radios. Small steps, but this was where their foundation was built. In 1950, they created first real success, the Type G, Japan's first magnetic tape recorder. It was big, heavy, and it far from perfect. But it worked, and it sold well to schools and government offices. Then came 1955, where Sony, or we're gonna call it TTK, made history with the TR-55. But here's an important fact. Sony, or back then known as TTK, didn't invent the transistor, but they were the first to realize its potential for mass-market consumer device. The result? A radio that you could actually carry around, because the TR-55 is the radio that brings a portable power. 2 years later, in 1957, TTK released the TR-63. This pocket-sized radio was the key that unlocked the massive United States market. The world was finally starting to notice this small company from Japan. By 1958, they realized that Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo was a mouthful for the global market. So they rebranded to Sony. The name was a mix of the Latin word sonus, which means sound, and the slang term Sonny Boy, which described a bright young man. It was short, catchy, and easy to say in any language. This wasn't just a name change, but it was a global vision. Sony then set its sight on the visual world, the television. Back then, the conventional color TV have the most common technical weaknesses, namely dim and less sharp images. So to overcome it, in 1968, they introduced the Trinitron. This wasn't just any color TV. The Trinitron offered the sharpest and brightest display of its time. And it was apparently the redemption of the Chromatron, which was Sony's previous color TV that turned out it had a complex and expensive technologies. Back then, for decades, if you wanted the best television on earth, there was only one answer.
It's a Sony.
In 1969, Sony created the TC50, a small and incredibly rugged cassette recorder. Well, if I want to say in a simple word, the TC50 is a portable cassette recorder. It was so reliable that NASA used it during the Apollo missions to record the voice of astronauts in space. But here's a cool fact. Not only used for the record voice like what NASA did if they have a space mission, but it could play the music too. But more exactly, pre-recorded music tape. One of Sony's founders, which is Masaru Ibuka, loved using it to listen to music while traveling. That simple habit became the blueprint for something much bigger 10 years later. 1969 is the year where Sony was entering the home video market by building a prototype of the video cassette recorder. This led to the release of the VP1000 in 1961. In 1975, 4 years after they released the VP1000, Sony launched the Betamax, which is the first practical home video recording system with incredible picture quality. But then, the legendary format war against the VHS began. Betamax had a better quality, but VHS had longer recording times. In the end, the world chose the convenience over the quality. Sony lost the home market battle. However, Betamax lived on for decades in the professional broadcasting world because of its sheer durability. 1979 was the turning point. Remember the TC50? That sleek space traveling recorder that also can listen to music that I mentioned earlier? Well, in that year, Sony took the exact same music on the go DNA and gave it to the world. They called it the Walkman. For the first time, music became personal. You could take your favorite tracks to the streets, the bus, the gym, or anywhere else. You take an earphone, connect it to the Walkman, put your favorite music artist into it, and you are now able to listen to music on the go. It wasn't just an electronic product, but it was a cultural revolution. Speaking of the Walkman, do you know how they sold this personal music idea to the world? It wasn't through the high-tech explanation, but try to look at this skit. Hello? Hey? Can you hear me? What the hell are you doing there? Well, I just want to recreating that famous Walkman commercial. Wait, is this you're recreating? That famous Walkman commercial? Yeah? There's something wrong? You're probably gonna be angry, but did you know who's that actual star of that commercial? I don't know. Who? The monkey. What? Well, you don't believe me, that's okay, but Google it. Oh yeah, I'll try it. Yes, in this famous ad, a macaque monkey sits peacefully in the wilderness, eyes closed, wearing Sony headphones. While the monkey is perfectly still, a narrator asks a deep philosophical question. Oto ga shinka shita. Hito wa dou desu ka? The progress in sound continues. But what about the mankind? It was a massive hit. It showed that Sony's sounds was so good, it could bring the total peace to any living soul. Funny as it is, that monkey became a symbol of the Walkman's success. Besides the audio, Sony experimenting with cameras through Sony Mavica that introduced in 1981. Even though it wasn't fully digital yet, it was the first step towards Sony becoming the king of camera sensor technology. Sony then pushed into the digital age, collaborating with Philips that soon to be competing each other. They co-developed the CD or the compact disc in 1982. Then came the Discman. Basically, it is a Walkman but used the CD as the media. The Discman bringing the crystal clear digital audio into your pocket. In 1990s, Sony faced a huge moment. Sony was originally working with Nintendo to create the CD-ROM add-on for Super Nintendo and the hybrid console. But Nintendo publicly backed out of the deal at the last minute. Or in a simple word, Nintendo suddenly betrayed Sony. But instead of walking away, Sony decided to get even. They established Sony Computer Entertainment, where they built their own console. And the result? It didn't just join the gaming industry, but it became a game changer, killing the cartridge era and bringing the 3D game to everyone's living room. Now, if you want to know the full story of how Sony took over the gaming world, you should go watch the video about the history of PlayStation so you know the details about it. After years of success, Sony began to struggle. The world was changing fast. Flat screen TVs became popular, and Sony started to fall behind. Well, even though they also created that thing since 1996. Their smartphones like Sony Ericsson and Xperia, it actually good. It had great technology, but it could not compete with Apple and Samsung. So from that, I learned that Sony actually had a great innovation, but it lacked focus. Then, Sony changed. Instead of trying to win everything, they focused on what they do best. They eventually went back to their roots: gaming, entertainment, and imaging technology. PlayStation became the company's backbone, and in the camera world, the Sony Alpha series managed to topple long-standing legends with its mirrorless technology. But the biggest surprise, Sony's camera sensors are used by many companies, including the Apple. So even if you don't use a Sony phone, the camera sensor in your phone that you're using right now, including your iPhone, is very likely made by Sony. So what is Sony now? Are they an electronics company or an entertainment company? The answer is both. Sony connects everything: games, movies, music, and cameras into one massive ecosystem. From a failed rice cooker in a tiny radio repair shop to a global empire, Sony proved that technology isn't just about the numbers on a spec sheet. It is about how we listen, how we watch, and how we play. The story of Sony is proof that failure is often just the first step of a revolution, and their story is far from over. And that's the history of Sony that I could tell you with the best of my ability. I know this video might have some mistakes and missing details, so if you have any extra information or if you want to give some corrections, feel free to drop it down in the comment section. You definitely don't want to miss any upcoming episodes, especially Saturday stories. So stick around and subscribe this channel for the new updates like this. I love to have you with me. And that's all of this Saturday stories. I hope you guys can enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in. And in the end, I'm Luthfi. It's always have a great day and see ya.